HOA burned my cabin over drama. They had no idea I'm a federal judge with power to strike back. How far would someone go just to feel in control? Would they really burn down everything you own? I hadn't planned to be at the cabin that day. Work had drained me. The city was suffocating, and I craved silence. So I drove up early. No calls, no docket, no black robe. Just me, the pines, and the scent of July in the woods. But silence never lasts long in a neighborhood run by people like Heather Olson, the HOA Karen, who believed our community in Elk Hollow existed solely for her to dominate. I'd seen her smug smile during meetings, felt her eyes judging the wildflowers in my yard, the wind chimes she deemed too loud, and lately, she'd been obsessed with my cabin. "You're lowering property values with that rustic eyesore," she'd spat during the last HOA meeting, while sipping her overpriced latte in heels wholly unsuited for gravel roads. I'd laughed her off. I thought it was harmless. I was wrong. That morning, I arrived at the cabin just in time to see smoke curling above the trees. I remember the chill that raced through Minute from the mountain air, but from recognition. I parked off-road, heart slamming. I ran through the woods on instinct, not the trail, crunching pine needles beneath my boots. The clearing opened, and there it was, a sanctuary, my cabin half consumed by fire. And standing nearby, as if posing for a painting of madness, was Heather. No fire truck, no panic, just her, holding an empty red canister and grinning like she'd won. "You should have complied, Margaret," she called out, her voice echoing off the trees. "Now everyone will finally see what happens when someone ignores community standards." I wanted to rush her, but something stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was focus. See, people assume that judges scream for order. But real justice doesn't raise its voice. It listens. And right now, I was listening. I tapped the small GoPro I'd mounted on a tree earlier that week, meant to record wildlife. It had caught everything. Heather's rant, her arson, her complete breakdown in real time. But then, another voice came out of nowhere. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" A teenage girl no more than 17 ran into the scene. Blonde, pale, horrified. I knew that face. It was Emily, Heather's daughter. The one she paraded at HOA barbecues, always dressed in pastel dresses and polite smiles. Heather flinched like she'd been slapped. "This doesn't concern you," she snapped, suddenly aware she was no longer alone. Emily wasn't buying it. She looked past her mother, saw the damage, the wreckage, the embers still glowing. And then she saw me still holding my phone, still in silence. Her mouth fell open. "Wait, you're Judge Morgan." It clicked for her faster than it ever did for her mother. Heather's fake composure started to crack. "You think you scare me?" she hissed, stepping forward. "You're just another pretentious city slicker pretending to matter in a mountain town. Your legal threats won't work here." I finally spoke, voice cold as the stream behind my property. "No threats, Heather. Just evidence. Federal arson. On private and protected land. And you're caught on camera twice." Her face twisted, but I wasn't finished. "And by the way, this isn't just my cabin. It's part of a conservation lease project, funded by the Department of the Interior. What you destroyed is federal property." Emily gasped. Heather blanched. Now she understood. But before she could scramble for another delusion to hide in, I turned on the Bluetooth speaker inside my truck. Heather's voice filled the clearing, the recording I'd grabbed from the last HOA meeting. "I don't care who she is. Margaret Morgan thinks her black robe gives her power here. I'll show her who really runs Elk Hollow." The look on her face was everything. Caught in her own arrogance. By her own words. But it wasn't over. Behind me, the sound of tires on gravel. 2 uniformed officers from the Forest Service stepped out, one holding a file, the other a fire extinguisher. "Judge Morgan?" one said, nodding at me. "We got your call. We've reviewed the footage. You were right to contact us first. This qualifies as felony arson on federal land." Heather tried to run. Didn't make it far. They cuffed her beneath the scorched remains of my porch swing, as Emily wept silently against a tree. I didn't enjoy watching her crumble, not really, but there was something deeply poetic about it. The same woman who weaponized community standards to terrorize others had just become a symbol of lawlessness. The queen of her little HOA kingdom dethroned by her own fire. And here's the bitter twist: this wasn't even the first time. The officers later told me there'd been mysterious complaints and anonymous citations targeting other residents, always just before a property sale or forced relocation. Heather had been manipulating the HOA for years, using fear to thin out the neighborhood and push her agenda. No one had dared challenge her. Until now. What would you have done if someone burned everything you owned just to assert control? Do people like Heather deserve a second chance, or do some lessons have to hurt? They took Heather away in silence. No screaming. No pleading, just stunned, trembling silence. Her hands cuffed behind her back. Her mouth twisted like she was still trying to find a way to spin the situation. But there was no spin. Not this time. Emily remained behind, standing frozen beside the tree. I walked over, unsure of what to say. She looked up at me, her eyes rimmed red, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know she'd actually do it. I thought she was just ranting again. I believed her. Maybe that's why I didn't turn away. She's been unraveling for a while, she continued. After the divorce, the HOA was the only thing she could control. She lost the house in town. Dad married someone younger. And suddenly all she had left was Elk Hollow. I nodded slowly. That doesn't excuse this. But thank you for stepping in. Emily wiped her face and offered a quiet, shaky smile. I'm sorry for what she did. I really am. Then she did something unexpected. She walked over to the scorched ground where the garden used to be, bent down, and picked up the little metal butterfly stake I'd placed beside the lavender patch last spring. It was blackened, but intact. She brushed it off and handed it to me. Maybe you can plant new flowers. Maybe I could. The investigation moved fast after that. The Forest Service and ATF confirmed arson within 48 hours. I handed over the GoPro footage, plus screenshots from the security camera I had near the woodshed. Heather had been lurking on my property days before the fire. But the real shockwave hit when the HOA's finances were audited. Turns out Heather had siphoned thousands from the HOA's discretionary fund for property improvements that never existed. Falsified receipts, fake contractor reports, even ghost maintenance requests. It was all there waiting to be exposed. She wasn't just a tyrant with a matchstick. She was a fraud, too. And the other board members? They flipped on her faster than dry leaves in October. She said we'd be sued if we didn't comply. One of them confessed during a special hearing. She kept using your name, Judge Morgan, saying you were abusing your power and needed to be handled. Handled. That word stuck with me. Handled, like I was some threat to be removed instead of a neighbor who just wanted to live in peace. But now the narrative had changed. I wasn't the threat anymore. She was. A few days after the fire, I stood before what remained of my cabin. Half of it had collapsed into a smoky ruin. The other half, a miracle of stonework and fire-resistant timber, still stood. But it wasn't the same. The smell of ash clung to everything. And yet I wasn't alone. Dozens of neighbors had come out of the woodwork. Some I barely knew. A man named Jorge, who lived 5 lots down, brought his teenage sons and a chainsaw. Mrs. Delaney, whose garden Heather once sabotaged with weed killer, brought potted roses. Even Tom, the retired firefighter who'd always kept to himself, showed up with lumber and said, "Let's rebuild. She doesn't get to win." What started as grief turned into a quiet rebellion. A group of us sat around a fire pit that night, passing around cocoa and stories. "She fined me $500 for hanging my hammock," someone muttered. "She called CPS on me for letting my kids play barefoot in the yard," another woman admitted. "She tried to evict me for painting my door turquoise," someone else whispered. Said it was visually offensive to the natural aesthetic. One by one, people opened up, and I realized something. This wasn't just my victory. This was a collective sigh of relief. A few weeks later, the official charges came in. Felony arson, fraud, misuse of HOA funds, harassment, and federal property destruction. Heather's attorney tried to play the mental health card. claimed she was under stress, that she'd snapped. But even the judge, one of my colleagues from circuit court, wasn't buying it. This wasn't a breakdown, he said. It was a campaign. In court, she refused to look at me. Her usual bluster was gone. No pearls, no blazer, just a gray jumpsuit and eyes full of fury. I spoke briefly at her sentencing. I didn't want vengeance, I told the court. I wanted a garden, porch, a view of the lake. But some people see peace and feel threatened by it. They mistake kindness for weakness, and they weaponize rules, bureaucracy, and influence to destroy what they don't understand. Heather was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison with mandatory restitution. But honestly, her downfall wasn't in the sentence. It was in the silence. The way her name stopped showing up on HOA signs. The way people erased her from community group chats. The way no one claimed her dog when the shelter called. Even her daughter moved away. I heard she's studying environmental law now. Maybe justice runs in the blood. The rebuild took time. Months. But every nail, every shingle, every beam, it meant something now. The new cabin stands taller, stronger. The walls lined with insulation and stories. The garden's back too. Bigger, wilder, with lavender again. And the metal butterfly stake that Emily cleaned rests by the new fence. I left the charred section untouched, a scar I refused to hide. Because that's what justice does. It remembers, forgives, but it never forgets. Fall arrived with the kind of clarity only the mountains can offer: sharp air, golden leaves, and a sky so blue it made the scars on the land feel smaller. My new cabin stood proudly where the old one burned. But something had shifted, not just in the architecture, but in the soul of Elk Hollow itself. The HOA had collapsed like a house of cards. Heather's arrest triggered a formal review by the county. The organization, once feared like a miniature dictatorship, was now being restructured under the oversight of the state. Every policy she had written, every violation she issued under scrutiny. I attended the first open community forum held after the shakeup. It was surreal. Gone were the laminated agendas, the smug power trips, the veiled threats of fines. Instead, neighbors spoke openly about shared spaces, kids playing in yards, freedom to paint their mailboxes whatever color they damn well wanted. I feel like I can breathe again, Jorge said. Like we finally got our home back. There was a proposal for a new rule. No single individual may hold multiple HOA leadership positions. Passed unanimously. I didn't speak much during that meeting. I didn't need to. People knew. They nodded, smiled, sometimes patted my shoulder on the way out. Not because I was a judge, but because I was their neighbor. And because someone had finally stood up and said, enough. But that sense of peace was tested again just 2 weeks later. It started with an email. Anonymous. Short. Chilling. You think it's over. It's not. She had help. First, I brushed it off. Thought maybe it was just leftover drama, someone trying to stir the ashes of a story that had already burned out. But then, my motion-activated trail cam caught something strange. A man, middle-aged, dressed in maintenance gear, walking behind my property line at 2 a.m. I checked with Forestry Service no crews scheduled. I showed the footage to the sheriff. He narrowed his eyes, then leaned back slowly in his chair. I've seen him before, he said. Used to be on Heather's contractor list. Showed up when she claimed she was repairing community lots. His name was Earl Dobson, supposedly a retired groundskeeper. No one had seen him since Heather was arrested. Until now. I didn't wait. I called in a contact from the U.S. Marshal's Office, Danielle Kwan, a tough, no-nonsense investigator I'd worked with on a previous federal racketeering case. She showed up at the cabin the next morning, boots in the mud, coffee in hand. You always attract the exciting ones, don't you, Judge? I showed her everything: emails, footage, the HOA financials I'd kept copies of. Danielle looked through them silently, until she stopped on one document, a transaction, dated 6 months before the fire, labeled security upgrades, trail cameras, perimeter sensors. Problem was, I hadn't installed those until 2 weeks before the arson. But Heather had billed the HOA for them long before. Danielle looked up at me. She was watching you, before you ever knew there was a threat. That night I didn't sleep. The next few days were a blur of movement interviews, document tracing, even digging through old HOA meeting minutes. Danielle coordinated with the State Attorney General's office to reopen a dormant investigation tied to HOA corruption complaints from other mountain communities. Heather wasn't just a rogue queen. She was part of a larger network of retired bureaucrats, shady contractors, even a disbarred city planner who'd been manipulating rural communities through HOAs for personal gain. It was exploitation disguised as order. Elk Hollow had just been the most dramatic example. But we had what we needed. Danielle called in a raid on Earl's property outside town. What they found was damning. Dozens of HOA files, altered inspection reports, forged letters marked official HOA citation, and a Map Me cabin circled in red ink. He'd been planning another hit. They arrested him quietly without fanfare. He folded almost immediately, and when asked who gave the orders, he said just one name: Karen. Always Karen. But not Heather. A new name. Another Karen. That's when I realized this wasn't just about one bad actor. It was about a mentality. About a system that allowed petty tyrants to mask cruelty behind bureaucracy. Heather had simply been the most visible flame. But now we saw the wildfire spreading beneath the surface, quiet, systemic, and dangerous. The federal task force launched what they called the CARE Act, Initiative Citizens Against Residential Exploitation, designed to investigate HOA abuse and bring transparency to community power structures. Guess who they invited to help draft the framework? Me. I never expected my quiet retreat to become the epicenter of a legal movement. But life has a way of handing you fire and daring you to build something better from the ashes. Today, my cabin window looks out over a different Elk Hollow. Kids race past on bikes. Mailboxes bloom in wild colors. The woman next door hosts open-air painting classes on her lawn every Sunday. No fines. No threats. And the old HOA sign? It was repurposed into a bench at the town square. Carved into the wood is a new motto. We live here, together. But what do you think? How do we balance order with freedom in shared communities? Have you ever seen rules used as a weapon instead of protection? Winter crept in quietly that year. Snow layered itself gently over Elk Hollow like a reset button, erasing ash trails, softening jagged memories, and muffling the scars left behind. But underneath the pristine surface, everything had changed. And this time for good. I spent those early winter mornings on the porch, wrapped in wool, watching the world rebuild itself. There was something poetic about it. The trees didn't ask for apologies from the wind. They just grew back stronger. So did I. The CRE initiative gained national attention. What started as a local scandal in a forgotten mountain community snowballed into a federal case study. News crews visited the cabin. Senators cited Elk Hollow in floor speeches. Victims from across the country wrote letters. Some told stories eerily similar to mine. Others were worse. One woman from Arizona had her therapy garden destroyed because an HOA didn't approve succulents. Another man in Florida was fined daily for leaving his disabled son's wheelchair ramp outside too long. These weren't just rules, they were control tactics. Oppression dressed in khakis and clipboards. So we fought back. I gave testimony on Capitol Hill. Danielle Kwan stood beside me. Emily, Heather's daughter, sent a signed statement too, describing her mother's mental state, the toxic culture of HOA worship, and how it had alienated her entire family. Emily's testimony was particularly powerful. She didn't defend her mother's actions, but she explained them, and somehow that added weight to the truth. She thought she was saving the neighborhood, Emily had written. But sometimes control isn't about safety. It's about fear. And fear can rot a person from the inside. The bill passed. Federal protections were introduced for homeowners in HOA-governed zones, oversight boards, grievance hotlines, limits on board power, and most importantly, transparency. A win for every quiet voice that had once been silenced by someone louder and crueler. But justice is rarely neat. Heather refused all interviews. She stayed silent during her transfer to a federal correctional facility in West Texas. Her lawyers tried one last appeal on mental instability grounds. Denied. The last I heard, she was assigned to horticultural duty in prison. Poetic in its own strange way. But what haunted me wasn't Heather anymore. It was the network, the machine she'd been a part of. And how many more Karens were out there armed with binders, bylaws, and bitterness. So I made it my mission to find out. With help from Danielle and 2 other retired judges, we began compiling data. Not just about HOA, but about abuse through structure. Any place where control could hide behind policy. Apartment boards, school PDAs, neighborhood committees, and even certain retirement communities. We called it the Veiled Power Project. And it shook people. Because power doesn't always wear a badge or hold a gavel. Sometimes it wears pearls. Back in Elk Hollow, life found its rhythm again. The holidays brought a kind of healing I didn't expect. Carolers stopped by the cabin, kids and parents alike. Neighbors baked pies and brought handmade decorations. I even caught Jorge trying to install solar lights on my walkway one night in the snow. Peace offering, he grinned. For the time I voted to ban your wind chimes. We laughed. A real laugh. The kind that starts low and climbs until the cold air doesn't even matter. And then, just before New Year's, something strange happened. I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a short note, handwritten in surprisingly elegant cursive. I was part of it, not proud of it. You broke the wheel. Thank you. A former board member. I read it 3 times before folding it away. Not for vengeance, for remembrance. Because even those who stood silently while injustice reigned still had their own reckonings to face. On New Year's Eve, I stood at the edge of the lake, bundled up in fur-lined boots, holding a mug of cider. The stars above looked like judgment and forgiveness at the same time. Emily stood beside me. She had come back for the holidays, now halfway through her first year at law school. Her eyes were steadier, her voice more grounded. "Do you think I'll end up like her?" she asked suddenly. I turned and looked at her, not the fearful girl in the trees, but the woman beside me now. "No," I said, "because you're not afraid to question yourself." That's where she got lost. Emily smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I just want to do some good." "You already are." The fireworks started minutes later, color splashing across the sky, bright and fleeting. I watched the lake catch fire with reflections and thought about everything that had happened. Everything burned. Everything rebuilt. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about boundaries, healing, choosing better every time someone tries to pull you back into the fire. And now I ask you, have you ever been made to feel small by someone hiding behind the rules? What would you do if standing up meant risking everything you built just to do what's right? Is there a Karen in your story, or have you ever been one without realizing it? Tell me, because these stories matter. And sometimes, sharing them is the bravest kind of justice we have.